Hello, I'm John Coleman from ApocatastasisInstitute, an institute for the humanities and alternative college and high school here on New Milford, Connecticut, USA. The purpose of this broadcast is to get into the November 21st edition of News with the Fetz with Dr. James Fetzer, and we're going to be making our way through current events and public events. The title here is Will Trump be outed? We're going to be making our way, as we do in this broadcast, through various slides. So I'm going to retire the bubble with the title now. We'll see it again at the end. The audience will be advised that Dr. Fetzer's sites are down below, and Moonrock Books, where you can purchase his publications, are there as well. As I turn things over to Dr. Fetzer, would you tell us how your class is going, your Conspiracy 101 class? What are some topics you're getting into, Dr. Fetzer? And when you answer that, please feel free to get into the topics at hand.
Well, thank you, John. Yeah, I'm really enjoying the class, and I'm glad you're able to participate as well. And we've been looking at JFK, 9/11, Sandy Hook, the moon landing, and we're about to turn to a whole panoply of these false flag stage events over and beyond Sandy Hook, including Orlando and Dallas, Charlottesville, Parkland, Las Vegas. I think the class is going to be fairly astonished at how frequently these events are taking place for political purposes. When the administration needs support for a particular item on its agenda, they simply stage another event to promote it. And they're using, crisis actors galore. It's fascinating stuff, John. Today, by the way, being the day before the 63rd observance of the assassination of JFK, I've included a brief synopsis of how we know the Warren report cannot be sustained. In fact, the evidence is so blatant. I think many in the audience are going to be astonished they hadn't thought of it before, because it becomes obvious from scratch. So let's begin here. Paul Craig Roberts. Is Trump killing his movement, and was Epstein running a Mossad blackmail operation? What I find interesting about this article, John, is Paul Craig Roberts is a very wise man, is emphasizing that it's not so much the sex trafficking that's at stake, but the blackmail operation. He begins, Neiman and I discuss these issues. We do not discuss whether Epstein was murdered, which is a question at the heart of the matter. By the way, I'm convinced he was not, that he was sprung from his prison cell. If he was murdered, why? Was Epstein murdered because he threatened to reveal he was running a blackmail operation, not a sex trafficking operation? Actually, it was both. Was he murdered because he had the dirt on too many elite Americans? Did the CIA have him murdered as revenge for Israel's spying on the U.S.? As I say, none of the above, because he wasn't murdered, and he was using sex trafficking as the lure, as the bait for the blackmail operation, which was espionage for Israel. So there you have the condensed summary of what's going on. The circumstances suggest that he was murdered. Yes, if you don't look too closely. A high-profile prisoner. He was in a suicide-proof cell watched by 2 guards by security cameras for the brief period during which he died. The guards happened to wander off the job. The security cameras malfunctioned or were turned off. In other words, not just part of the security failed, all of it did, which is, John, exactly what you'd want if you're going to spring the guy. And from the footage, which has all been massively edited, there's just one clip where you can see an orange suited individual going up a stairway that I submit is Jeffrey Epstein making his escape from his locale. There is no evidence of suicide, agreed. There is only assertions by authorities, just what you'd expect in a cover-up. How often do authorities tell the truth? President John F. Kennedy's assassination, his brother Robert F. Kennedy's assassination, 9/11, Saddam Hussein's weapons of mass destruction, Assad's using chemical weapons, the lies about Gaddafi. These examples of authorities saying the opposite of truth are endless. He's got that right, John, as I shall confirm with JFK today.
And by the way, for the audience, in an earlier episode of this series, Dr. Fetzer laid out uh, this whole look at Epstein escaping the prison or being absconded from the prison. And you can find that in our previous shows, linked down below in the description, maybe about a month and a half before this recording. We continue reading. If Epstein was running an Israeli blackmail operation to ensure American conformity with Israel's policy of expansion in the Middle East, it is unlikely any youths below the age of sexual consent or present involuntarily. Israel would hire young women rather than jeopardize an important operation by kidnapping underage girls and holding them in sexual bondage, which could lead to an investigation. Moreover, whether or not 17-year-old Virginia Guthrie was underage depends on her state of residency. In the 50 U.S. states, the age varies from 16 to 18 years old. In 31 of the 50 states, the age of consent is 16. In 8 of the states, the age of consent is 17. In 11 of the states, the age is 18. The age of sexual consent is arbitrary. In 1871, Delaware lowered the age of female sexual consent from 10 to 7 years old. In the rest of the U.S. at the time, the age was 10 to 12 years old. Today, in some Southern American and African countries, the age of female consent is 12. In Austria, it is 14. In France, Poland, and the Czech Republic, Sweden, Greece, Denmark, and Iceland, the age of consent is 15. In the rest of Europe, the age of consent is 16 or 17. In China, the age of consent is 14. In Japan, the age was recently raised from 13 to 16. In many Muslim countries, sexual intercourse outside of marriage is prohibited. In Iran, males can marry at 15 and girls at 13.
In the U.S., the age of consent was raised partly to reduce teenage pregnancy. Today, this problem is combated by mothers having 12-year-old daughters on birth control pills. Moreover, whether or not sex with an underage female is a criminal offense depends on the age of the male. As long as the male is not 21, the arbitrary age of adulthood, it is not a criminal offense. Consider the paradox. An 18-year-old American, a non-adult, cannot purchase alcohol or a gun, but can be sent as a soldier to kill and die abroad. This shows how arbitrary the age definitions are or have become. The narrative that Epstein was running a sex trafficking operation for pedophiles, and it's fascinating to me that he makes this argument, appeals to mega Americans who see the elite as a corrupt class. As many mega Americans are Christian Zionists, they'd want to hear that Israel was entrapping Americans for blackmail purposes. Male-hating feminists also prefer the sex trafficking narrative as it lays the blame on men. Emotions and indoctrination predispose much of the public to see the Epstein saga as an underage sex trafficking business. This predisposition protects Israel by dismissing a blackmail operation as anti-Semitism and a conspiracy theory. Of course. The question is whether there are sufficient Americans free of indoctrination and brainwashing, capable of rational analysis instead of emotional responses, to ever reach the truth about anything. If a person reads comment sections on articles, podcasts that are posted, he sees a lot of emotion and little thought. A person also discovered that people follow website, podcasts, and social media that support what they already believe. There are not many whose beliefs are based on objective analysis of facts. Indeed, What the actual facts are is becoming harder to ascertain. How likely is it that a majority can arrive at the truth on any issue? Now, here we have a very nice piece by Nick Fuentes, John, for us to share in part.
Petition, which was created by Ro Khanna, the Democrat, Thomas Massie, the Republican, has finally been brought to the floor of the U.S. House and was passed almost unanimously. This is the bill that will compel the DOJ to release all the Epstein files. Today it passed unanimously. Now it goes to the U.S. Senate, where it has already been agreed upon that it will pass unanimously there as well. And then quickly it will move to the White House, where President Trump says that he will sign it. So this is an unbelievable earthquake. Because again, as I said at the beginning of the show, and we'll work through some of the timeline, President Trump has been working tirelessly and spending enormous political capital basically since he took office to prevent exactly this from happening. Ever since January of this year, so 10 months ago, Trump has been fighting, and he's come up with every trick. He tried to distract the people. He tried to deceive the people. He tried to bury and cover up the Epstein files, tried to stall Congress and prevent them from considering it. He threw his weight around. He used intimidation, tried to bully Republicans, his supporters, and his political allies to stop talking about it. He did everything, pulled out every stop. And in the end, not only did it not work, but in the final week, it looks like there was this boiling over. And in the end, not only did the bill pass, but it passed unanimously in the House and the Senate. And go figure. Just a week ago, you had 4 Democrats, or was it 6 or 7 Democrats? 6 Democrats, I think it was, held up the entire U.S. Senate, shut down the government for over 40 days, over nothing. Think about it. 6 Democrats shut down the entire government, the longest shutdown in history, for 45 days. They were going to shut down air travel during Thanksgiving. They were going to prevent food stamps from going out to 40 million people. They furloughed much of the government. I knew many people in government that didn't get paid for a month. TSA wasn't getting paid. You had hour-long security lines in Texas at LaGuardia, New York, over nothing. And this week, every single member, they all got together. 2 weeks ago, they could barely come to an agreement to let the planes fly during Thanksgiving and Christmas. And now every single member, Republican and Democrat, House and Senate, has come together and agreed, we want the Epstein files against the wishes of the president. This is a coup. This is a mutiny. Make no mistake about it. That's the significance of it. Trump lost on this one. And this is a story. This is from The Hill. It says, quote, the Senate agreed by unanimous consent on Tuesday to approve a House-passed bill that will require the Justice Department to release all unclassified records and documents related to convicted sex offender Jeffrey Epstein, sending the bill to President Trump's desk for a signature. Senate Democrat leader Chuck Schumer on Tuesday received unanimous consent to approve the Epstein Files Transparency Act upon receipt of the legislation from the House, only hours after the lower chamber voted 427-1 to approve it. The Democratic leader received approval from all 99 of his colleagues to deem the bill passed as soon as the Senate receives the legislation from the House. Senate aides said they expected that formality to happen either tonight or tomorrow morning. Trump says he will sign the legislation after spending months discrediting it, a sign that the wave of public support for greater disclosure of what the DOJ collected from its investigations of Epstein had become too strong to oppose in Washington. Speaker Mike Johnson, who voted for the legislation earlier Tuesday, accused the Democrats of using it to score political points, and get this, this is the Speaker of the House, urged Senate Republicans to make changes to the bill to, quote, make sure we don't do permanent damage to the political system. Votes unanimously for the Epstein Transparency Act. It forces the Department of Justice to release all the remaining Epstein records and documents in their custody. And the Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson, says, well, we should consider some amendments and we should restrict the scope of the disclosure. In other words, they want to keep some files hidden. Why? Mike Johnson says, quote, to make sure we don't do permanent damage to the political system. What would be permanently damaging to the political system about releasing all the files? See, they're giving the game away here. And what they're telling us is that at the highest levels, probably people on both sides are implicated in the disclosure. That Jeffrey Epstein, running a sex trafficking blackmail ring, that's what it is. He worked with fashion and modeling agencies to recruit young girls, in particular underage girls. He threw lavish parties using billionaire money, maybe from foreign governments, maybe from the Mega Group, a collection of pro-Israel billionaires. And with his lavish parties, his island, his New York City house, and the girls, he brought government officials, Hollywood celebrities, powerful businessmen to these parties, secretly recorded them using cameras and microphones to blackmail them. And then I believe, and it's my understanding, that then he sold the blackmail. He functioned as sort of an intelligence mercenary, working with CIA, working with Israeli military intelligence, working with MI6. And it appeared to form some kind of triangle between the Labor Party in England, the Labor Party in Israel, and the Democratic Party in the United States, but also overlap with all the other political actors in those countries, and forming something like a intelligence mercenary outfit triangulating between these three countries, which is a very conspicuous triangle. And Mike Johnson says we cannot release all the files pertaining to this situation because it might permanently damage the political system. Why? Because it might undermine its legitimacy and credibility. If we found out that the government was being controlled using blackmail and bribery, because it would undermine confidence in our government, in our democracy. If we learned that our civilian elected leaders were not answering to the will of the people, but were actually being controlled by foreign governments, intel agencies, that our tax money, that our government, our military, our regulations are actually under the control of shadowy forces that are engaged in sexual trafficking and blackmail, working for God only knows who. Why would we want to maintain a political order based on that? That's sort of the whole point. We want this to destroy the political system. Were we not clear about that? That's the whole point. That's the whole point, by the way, of the Trump movement. The political system is not working for the people. The political system is not answerable or accountable to the people because the political system is corrupt. And at these bottlenecks, this is where intelligence mercenaries, foreign governments, money is exercising undue influence in a way that is concealed from the public for an agenda that we don't know about, and maybe we don't even understand. Our sovereignty, our freedom, our liberty, our independence has been stolen from us by this system. Why would we want to maintain this system? That's the goal. The system is corrupt. The system has to be destroyed. That's the whole point, is to undermine its credibility, undermine its legitimacy, so that it can be overthrown and replaced. And we're not calling for a violent revolution. We have elections in this country. That's what elections are for. We have a constitution. And if we have free speech, if we have our First Amendment, if we're able to access the public square on social media, then the will of the people should overpower the money. In this case, if we find out who was on the island, we're going to vote to replace everybody that was complicit in it. And that might give you some hope that we can peacefully replace the political system. That's the whole point. Johnson says we can't give away the whole game because then it might undermine the political system. Why? Because you're all guilty? Is that it? Because it's all true? Because you're all guilty and you know that if we saw all the Epstein files, nobody would pay their taxes, nobody would vote, because why would you? What would be the point? You're paying parking tickets while they're being blackmailed for child rape? You're paying taxes. You're forking over 25% every year. 3 months out of the year, you're working for the government, and that money is being controlled by people that were on the island? Yeah, hopefully there would be a revolution the day after that. Hopefully the political order would collapse the next day. That's sort of the point. And you and Kevin McCarthy and Frank Luntz and Trump and Bill Clinton and all of it. Yeah, the whole point is to throw all of them out. And I don't even care who replaces them. They say, what about the progressive left? What about them? They say, what about the reactionary right? What about it? So anyway, that's his comments on it, but it goes on. Thankfully, Johnson was not successful. Johnson's pleas fell flat after Representative Thomas Massie, the lead Republican co-sponsor of the bill.
John, I think Nick Fuentes has just knocked it right out of the park. I think he's got it exactly right. He's not talking about a violent revolution here. He's talking about massive reform. And I think we would all agree we need massive reform in government, especially if it's being controlled behind the scene through sex trafficking and blackmail operations, as appears to be the case. In fact, at this point, I don't think there can be any serious doubt about it. Now, I have heard the argument that there's concern on some hands by some parties. I'm not sure whether this would include the Donald himself or not, that those who were engaged in these activities included cultural icons, religious leaders, sports figures, actors and actresses. I've heard the Pope, Michael Jordan, Tom Hanks, George Clooney, all reported to be implicated here, which is a staggering blow to culture worldwide. But John, we have to let it out. The truth must be known. It's maybe a massive psychological blow, but we need to get ourselves in a correct understanding of what the hell has been going on. And if that's what it takes, so be it. Marjorie Taylor Greene has suggested Israel or other foreign governments may be pressuring Trump to cover up the Epstein files. That would be, of course, utterly unsurprising, is what she's had to say. Renegade Republican, and I'm just wildly enthusiastic about her. Marjorie Taylor Greene Sunday publicly questioned whether Israel or another country is pressuring President Trump to conceal the files on late, I think not, sex predator Jeffrey Epstein. The Congresswoman has noted in a post on X that she hasn't received donations from AIPAC, while asking who and what country is putting so much pressure on Trump. And of course, it has to be Israel. There is no alternative. Greene pressed on Sunday's State of the Union on CNN about whether she was alleging Israel is pushing the president of the United States to cover up the Epstein files. Initially, claimed she wasn't. Why claim she's not? Of course she is. GOP representative Marjorie Taylor Greene questions whether a foreign government is influencing President Trump to keep him from releasing the Epstein files. No, I simply just asked out loud, is there a foreign government? It could be any foreign government. I don't think so. But is a foreign government, to wit Israel, pushing to keep this covered up because people just don't understand the big fight against releasing the Epstein files? But when anchor Dana Bash brought up her ex-post about AIPAC, Greene said, I'm questioning that government, Israel in particular, and questioning any other foreign government. But it's Israel in our sights.
And just one point on the Fuentes clip. It's been a long time since I've heard Frank Luntz's name mentioned, but if you want to know how this mono party works, you should look into Frank Luntz, who's a very strange individual and very much a power broker behind the scenes in the RNC. Continuing.
Very interesting, John. Yeah, do you want to pick up on this one?
Greene's Saturday Post claimed that Epstein files, which she has been demanding Trump fully release, and AIPAC's concerns with her were fueling Republican presidents' attacks against her. Quote, I think it's a question that many Americans are asking, especially when we saw information recently come out in these emails that the oversight committee that I serve on has released. And we saw Jeffrey Epstein with ties to former Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Barak, unquote. Greene told CNN of her ex-post, quote, I think the right question to ask is, was Jeffrey Epstein working for Israel? And I'm proud to say I don't take money from AIPAC. I don't take money from any special group of people, unquote. Recent disclosures from the powerful House Oversight Committee detailed communications between Epstein and Ehud Barak, who served as Israel's prime minister from 1999 to 2001, about a conflict in the West African country of Cote d'Ivoire in early 2010s.
Here's Marjorie Taylor's tweet. This in the Epstein files is why I'm being attacked by President Trump. It really makes you wonder what's in those files and who and what country is putting so much pressure on him. I forgive him, and I will pray for him to return to his original make-up promises. I'm with her. Here's an earlier good morning. I want to thank everyone who texted and posted and commented support for me. You are so kind, and I appreciate, love, and support you too. I never thought that fighting to release the Epstein files, defending women who are victims of rape, and fighting to, I'm sure it goes on to say, get the truth out, could prove to be such an arduous task. John.
Epstein had encouraged Barak, who was then serving as Israel's defense minister, to take advantage of the conflict and leverage Israeli intelligence gathering of phone systems in the beleaguered country. Quote, we saw him making business deals with them, also business deals that involved the Israeli government, and seems to have led into their mutual intel agencies, unquote, Greene said, referring to the communications between Epstein and Barak. Greene's remarks come in the midst of an epic feud between her and Trump that erupted last week after months of her taking digs at the president. Trump yanked his support for Greene on Friday and accused her of going to the quote-unquote far left. During her wide-ranging interview with CNN, Greene also defended right-wing pundit Tucker Carlson's controversial softball interview with white supremacist Nick Fuentes and suggested CNN should have Fuentes on as well. Quote, I defend every single person's free speech rights, unquote, Greene said. And Greene told Dana Bash from CNN, quote, I don't apologize for that. And I don't believe in canceling people. I think it's important for people like Tucker Carlson and yourself to interview everyone. Quote, I did watch the full interview with Tucker, and I admire him for interviewing many people as well as exposing a lot of powerful information, unquote. In 2022, Greene spoke at the first at the America First Political Action Conference, which Fuentes organized in Florida, near where the Conservative Political Action Committee, or CPAC, was at the time.
Fuentes has repeatedly expressed affection. This is odd. For Adolf Hitler, Joseph Stalin, and other notorious figures. He's also cast doubt on the Holocaust and argued that women should be more subservient to men. Well, I couldn't agree with him more about doubting the Holocaust. I'm a major Holocaust skeptic. It's provable that 6 million did not die, that there weren't even any gas chambers. Hundreds of babies were born in the camps. Auschwitz, for example, had a woodworking shop, a symphony, a concert hall, a hospital with OBGYN facilities, even a brothel, because one of his generals had convinced Hitler the men would work harder if they were promised sex as a reward. They did use Zyklon B for delousing of prisoners because the lice were spreading typhus and dysentery in the camps and others to preserve the health of the inmate for the obvious reason you cannot get work from a corpse. The International Committee of the Red Cross recalibrated the total number who died in all camps from all causes in 1996. 296,081, none of whom died from being put to death in a gas chamber. So Nick has certainly got that right. Regarding his attitude toward Hitler, Stalin, and others, I would have to look at the context. But there are other historians, revisionist historians, who want to get history right, to suggest Hitler performed economic miracles in Germany in the wake of the World War I and the abusive Treaty of Versailles. So I do believe it's correct that Hitler had strength for good and weaknesses for evil, as did, for example, Lyndon Johnson and other presidents of our ilk. Green denied knowing who Fuentes was at the time of the 2022 event, reiterated Sunday she wasn't aware of his hateful views when he attended it. And as I say, that's going to be a question of context. I'd like to know more before drawing a conclusion. She later told Bash, you should have Nick Fuentes on your show. And after hearing him, you can see exactly why. White House spokeswoman Abigail Jackson Sunday shrugged off Green's attacks against Trump, telling the Post the administration won't be distracted. These emails prove literally nothing, and they're talking about a whole bunch of emails where Epstein is talking about his relationship with Trump and the alike, which appear to be very damning on their face. But she's denying it and saying of the Epstein files, Democrats and the mainstream media are desperately trying to use this hoax as a distraction to talk about anything other than the president when he wins. Well, that's not going to cut it. It's not a hoax. Meanwhile, Zionists are freaking out about losing control of the narrative. Caitlin Johnstone is just wonderful. Check this out, John.
Former Obama speechwriter Sarah Hurwitz made some very revealing remarks during an appearance at the Jewish Federation of North America General Assembly on Sunday, expressing frustrations with the way younger Jews are dismissing pro-Israel arguments because of the carnage they've seen in Gaza. Quote, we are now wrestling with a new, I think, generational divide here. And I think that's particularly true in that social media is now our source of media. Unquote, Hurwitz said. Quote, it used to be that the news you got in America was American media, and it was pretty mainstream. You know, it generally didn't express extreme anti-Israel views. You had to go to a pretty weird bookstore to find global media and fringe media. But today, we have social media, which is the global medium. Its algorithms are shaped by billions of people worldwide who don't really love Jews. So while in the 1990s, a young person probably wasn't going to find Al Jazeera or someone like Nick Fuentes. Today, those media outlets find them. They find them on their phones, unquote, continuing. It's also increasingly post-literate media, less and less text, more and more videos, Hurwitz continued. So you have TikTok just smashing our young people's brains all day with videos of carnage in Gaza. And this is why so many of us cannot have a sane conversation with younger Jews, because anything that we try to say to them, they are hearing it through this wall of carnage. So I want to give data and information and facts and arguments, and they're just seeing in their minds carnage, and I sound obscene.
Indeed, here's Richard Matter tweeting. The most insane part of this clip is when she claims that Holocaust education is problematic because today it's failing to make young Jews blindly love Israel. And instead, they're sympathizing with victims of racism, be they Black or Palestinian. What a wretched wish. Chris Mahan, former Obama speechwriter Sarah Hurwitz, laments the Jewish Federation of people are finding content from Al Jazeera and Nick Fuentes on social media and seeing videos of the carnage in Gaza. Holocaust education has backfired in part, and people see Palestinians as the Jews' victims. Yes, the victim card has been overplayed and cannot be revived.
Hurwitz went on to say that Holocaust education has begun backfiring because it has been giving young people the wrong impression that genocide is always bad. Quote, and I think it unfortunate, the very smart bet that we made on Holocaust education to serve as anti-Semitism education in this new media environment, I think that is beginning to break down a little bit because, Holocaust education is absolutely essential. But I think it may be confusing to some of our young people about anti-Semitism because they learn about big, strong Nazis hurting weak, emancipated Jews. And they think, oh, anti-Semitism is like anti-Black racism, right? Powerful white people against powerless Black people. So when on TikTok all day long, they see powerful Israelis hurting weak, skinny Palestinians, it's not surprising that they think, oh, I know the lessons of the Holocaust is you fight Israel. You find big, powerful people hurting the weak people. Unquote. Oh boy, lots to unpack here. It's just so fascinating to see a former White House speechwriter making so many of the points that anti-Zionists have been making for years, but taking the exact opposite meaning from them. For instance, the mainstream legacy media has always hidden anti-Israeli views from the public, and that was a good thing. Social media has now given Palestinians the ability to expose the truth about Israel's abuses, and that's a bad thing.
People haven't fallen for the Zionist spin and narrative diddling anymore because they've seen the carnage in Gaza with their own eyes, and that's a problem. People who learn from Holocaust education that genocide is wrong have been applying the same lesson to genocide in Gaza, and that means they're confused. How can she say genocide is not always wrong, John? I mean, that's so insulting. Hurwitz isn't denying Israel's abuses or framing its genocidal atrocities as a problem. She's just coming right out and saying that people obtain information and moral clarity about those abuses is the problem. The atrocities aren't wrong. What's wrong is people seeing those atrocities and calling them what they are. I love the way she complains she looks obscene for trying to lay out arguments and narratives justifying the Gaza Holocaust for people who've seen the wall of carnage from the genocide. I mean, yes, obviously, you're going to look obscene if you try to tell somebody why raw footage of massacres, mutilated children, emaciated bodies is actually showing something that is justifiable and acceptable. You can't stand in front of a pile of child corpses justifying their murder and then whine when people ignore your spin meistering and keep staring at the tiny bodies. That's like murdering an entire family and then telling the cops, Well, you're not listening to my reasons for killing them. They're doing the normal thing while you are being obscene.
And Dr. Fetzer, before we move on to the final look at JFK on the anniversary, just one insight that I might offer with my history background. And I think this presses very much on the nerve of this last article. So when we have the discipline of history, there is a subset of that called historiography, which is the way history has been subsequently written and presented and digested by the population. And I've spent much of the past year as a private project and type of enrichment reading all of the books in the public library down the street on the Holocaust. And there's about 2 very fat, heavy shelves full of such mainstream books. And lately, Winston Churchill's 5-volume account of the war has hijacked me, but I will return to the project. But I would say is anyone who's interested in the Holocaust, and there's a lot of interest in this, a lot of us have seen revisionist histories like the Europa series of documentaries and some other things. I would say the first step in trying to understand what's gone on in the Second World War is to, shall we say, Steven Spielbergize that event. And that is to say, remove the true, the true reality that we've been given false propaganda and a false presentation of this event, terribly sentimentalized, and done so for political ends having to do with the state of Israel in the past 80 odd years. To Steven Spielbergize the war and to realize the way this has been presented has been very manipulative. Even to do that, you simply just have to get on your bicycle and go to the library down the street. You don't need to get to really neat, occulted, deep dives. Just basic history will create much focus on that event and remove, in my opinion, a lot of the cartoonish way this has been presented. And I would just bring that up, that historiographical aspect. It has really helped clarify things for me and given a balance as well, because sometimes people realize a lot of the nonsense concerning the Holocaust, and they often will make equally, in my opinion, equally as clunky reactions to that. And just to remove the pop media and that aspect, I would encourage people to do.
John, I so appreciate your additional research into historiography. The Holocaust has been the most controversial, disputed, and falsified event in world history by far, even exceeding the moon landing, because it's had so many practical consequences, political, legal, and otherwise. It was a moral calamity to attribute to the Germans actions they did not take. Hitler wasn't promoting the extermination of the Jews. He did not want them in government for sure, and did not allow them to participate. But the fact is that it was a very modest number of the inmates of all the camps who died, none of whom from being put to death in gas chambers using Zyklon B. And I think it's terribly important that we get history right. Among the 6 books that Amazon has banned that I have edited, my book on the moon landing, and I suppose we didn't go to the moon either, which my co-editor, Mike Palachek, suggested might be a response to the title of our first, Nobody Died at Sandy Hook. And I suppose we didn't go to the moon either. Well, we didn't go to the moon either. That book was banned by Amazon at the request of the ADL because it has a selection of essays on the Holocaust, featuring Thomas Dalton, who's published a book about the Holocaust debate, Robert Forisson, who is a preeminent revisionist historian, French intellectual whom I admire beyond words, Nick Ollerstrom, who has published perhaps the most important book on the Holocaust entitled Breaking the Spell, for which he invited me to write the introduction to myself. So Amazon banned 200 to 2,000 books on the Holocaust. Maybe it's closer to 200, given what you have found on the shelves of local libraries. But the fact is, they've done it because they're going to preserve the myth of Jewish victimhood, which has been used to play on the guilt of Europeans and Americans to give special status and deferential treatment to the Jewish community and to Israel specifically. So it's indispensable all of this nonsense, historical fiction masquerading as fact, be debunked. And I greatly appreciate your efforts toward that end, my friend. As an historian, I applaud what you're doing.
Excellent. Thank you for that. And I will get these slides on, moving to our next topic, queued up right now, and retire the bubble here. But yeah, we ought to do it down the road when my project is through. We'll do a chit chat on them, and we'll do a whole show on that, because there's a lot to it. But if you can see beyond Schindler's List and Anne Frank, you'll be in right form. But anyway, take it away, Dr. Fetz.
John, on the eve of the 63rd observance of the assassination of JFK, I just want to review some of the bidding and how we know the Warren Commission bamboozled the American people. It was all deliberate. Lyndon Johnson was at the center of the entire event. He forced himself on the ticket as vice president with JFK in Los Angeles in 1960 in order to have Jack taken out so he could accede to the presidency. Here's a part of what you can also find online. UK column, Oswald could not have shot JFK, which I did for Jeremy from South Africa. He's a wonderful host like you. Germ warfare. We all know the official narrative, 3 shots fired from above and behind. In fact, the day of the assassination, the Secret Service and the FBI reported they had concluded there have been 3 and only 3 shots from above and behind. One had hit Jack in the back, another had hit Connolly in the back, and a third had hit Jack in the back of the head, killing him. All 3 of those shots were legitimate. Those were real shots. But how can we account for Malcolm Kilduff, the acting press secretary, reporting his death, saying it was a simple matter of a bullet right through the head while pointing to his right forehead, and attributing that finding to Admiral George Berkeley, the president's personal physician? Meanwhile, on NBC that day and other networks, famous newsmen, including Chet Hutley to the left foreground here, were reporting 2 shots, one a small puncture wound to the throat, which Malcolm Perry, MD, could perform a simple tracheostomy incision through the wound, described 3 times as a wound of entry. The bullet was coming at him. And that shot to the right temple, where later in the evening, as the stories began to trickle in about the FBI and the Secret Service conclusion, Frank McGee, who is nobody's fool, says, this is incongruous. How can the man have been shot from in front, as they've been reporting all day, from behind? And of course, he had it exactly right. On the right, you can see here a diagram of the 4 shots then to JFK, the hits on JFK alone. He was that shot to the back, which was fired from the top of the county records building, the shot to the back of the head fired from the Daltex, the shot to the throat fired from inside the triple underpass, the shot to the right temple fired from the intersection of the grassy knoll and the picket fence, all by different shooters, of course. And then we have David Manick discovering there was yet a 3rd shot to the head, not just the back of the head, where Jack slumped forward. Jack eased him back up. He was hitting the right temple, but near simultaneous in the side of the head. That's 5 shots to JFK alone. Then we had the hit to Connolly. There may have been more than one. That's 6. And we also have an FBI, a CIA guy who is a Dallas cop firing a shot from the grassy knoll that wound up in the grass. So that's already 7, framing the patsy. Lee was in the doorway when the motorcade passed by. They made him remove his overshirt before doing mug shots. He told Fritz he'd been out front with Bill Shelley, which was true. Indeed, everything Oswald told Fritz has turned out to be true. Here's the most famous and important photograph of the assassination. You can actually see where the bullet passed through the windshield right here to hit Jack in the throat. This figure has been identified or thought to have been Lee Oswald. We'll prove it. Here you have Secret Service looking around as though they have no idea what's going on. Here's a close-up of that area. This figure beside him is known as Black Hole Man, holding up his shirt has been obfuscated for reasons that'll become obvious. Notice the figure known as Doorman is missing his left shoulder. You got a figure known as Black Tie Man is both in front of him and behind him at the same time. Here's a close-up where you can see more. Plus, a figure of a black man has been introduced to obfuscate the shirt he was wearing. Lee, when he was arrested, bore a striking resemblance to the man in the doorway. Richard Hook did brilliant work. Initially find 5 to 7 similarities, winding up with over 50. And of course, they could go on and on because they're the same person. The Dallas cops were so aware they had to remove his outer shirt and appear only in his T-shirt in the mugshot, so the similarity would be less conspicuous. Larry Rivera did studies superpositions, and on the left he superimposed It's Not Plain to discover that it was indeed Lee Oswald in the doorway. On the right, Billy Lovelady. He did more to confirm Lee in the doorway. Turns out Billy was the man with his hands up there raised. Turns out that's where he was. He was also in the doorway, but he was a doorman. Larry did a reconstruction. Turned out the FBI had Billy Lovelady come in for an interview on the 29th of February, 1964, wearing the same clothing he had then. It was a red and white vertically striped short sleeve shirt. Not at all like the richly textured long sleeve shirt that the man in the doorway, Lee Oswald, was wearing. The FBI, the CIA, tried to claim that the photograph had been published too early to have been altered, but the evidence of alteration is overwhelming. They created a fake version of the special editions of various obscure newspapers to make their point. This was the News Palladium. Here's the original. President Kennedy killed by sniper. Here's the CIA variant. President is slain. This is how they use our tax dollars. Similarly for the backyard photograph. Fritz showed Lee one of the staged backyard photograph. Lee said it was his face based on someone else's body. He had it exactly right, but didn't live long enough to prove it. Jim Mars and I agree it was Roscoe White, who was a body double standing for Lee. Larry Rivera confirmed it. Here you have this famous photograph that was published on the cover of Life magazine to incriminate Lee in the minds of most Americans, holding the Mannlicher Carcana with which he's alleged to have shot JFK. He's got a revolver in a holster with which he's supposed to have shot Officer J.D. Tippit, and holding 2 communist newspapers. So combining motive and means with the opportunity. There turns out to be an insert line, by the way, here to confirm just what Lee said about his face being posted on someone else's body. He had it exactly right. Jim Mars and I concluded, in part because this lump here on the wrist from a bone that never healed right, that it was indeed Roscoe White. Larry did superpositions where you could see Lee's Roscoe's body filling out. He was far more muscular than Lee. Here you can see the image of Lee being far slighter than that of Roscoe White. Meanwhile, if you want to conclude the big picture, and there's so much I've published about it, the sponsors who wanted Jack dead, and it turns out each of them put up their own shooter, including the CIA, the Joint Chiefs, the anti-Castro-Cubans, the Mafia, the Fed, the Texas Soilmen, Israel, and of course, Lyndon Johnson himself. where the facilitators included Lyndon of the assassination and J. Edgar of the cover-up, where the mechanics, the shooters, their supervisors and coordinators included George Herbert Walker Bush and Edward Lansdale, responsible for assassinations around the world, including in Vietnam, who appears to position the shooters and determine the sequence of shots. And if you want more, you can also track down my fourth book, JFK, Who, How, and Why. And I must say, John, this was the greatest murder mystery in history. It was extraordinarily complicated in how it was designed. They got a hold of the body. They were able to alter the x-rays, autopsy photographs, substituted another brain, edit the whole movies. Massive, complicated to unpack. But with the benefit of experts I brought together, we managed to undo the cover-up. And here I'm giving you just a brief summary overview of what happened to our 35th president on that tragic and fateful day.
Thank you for that, Dr. Fetzer. And as you mentioned in our very first recording, all those 15 or 16 months ago, the reason this is important, you're bringing it up because of the anniversary as of this broadcast, but the reason the JFK event is so important all these years later, and why you so often bring it up, is this is really the beginning of this chapter, so to speak, of the agenda. Everything spawns, in a sense, from the hanky-panky at that time. You mentioned Herbert Walker Bush, and I'm struck as you say that in a sense the last, we'll say 60, 70 odd years have been the outworking, in a sense, of that man's dark vision of the world, H.W. Bush. And it is hard, maybe it's impossible to exaggerate in terms of conspiracy and just public events, the importance and the gravity of the JFK event.
John, you're absolutely right. Once again, as an historian, you have an appreciation of this pivotal moment in American history, because his death was followed by a succession of presidents who would never have occupied that office but for his demise. And it was all by design. And there's much more to learn about it, but not here and now on this occasion. I just want to thank you once again, John, for these opportunities to present this information for the benefit of your audience. You're doing a great job, my friend, and I admire you for all you're doing.
Thank you very much for that, Dr. Fetzer. We'll let you off now. I know you have an obligation coming up at the top of the hour. To the audience, thank you for your attention. Thank you for patronizing Dr. Fetzer's sites and his book, and perhaps his class, as the case may be. And when you've digested that whole corpus of information, why don't you head over to ApocatastasisInstitute.wordpress.com and consider enrolling in one of our courses. And Dr. Fetzer, especially, thank you for your time this morning.
My great pleasure, John. Thank you so much.